Hey everyone, let's jump right into this explainer mapping out the life cycle of a cyber attack. Today we're going to look under the hood of digital security by exploring 10 incredibly powerful open source hacking tools. We hear about cyber attacks in the news literally all the time, right? But how exactly do they happen? What tools are actually being used by these actors? Well, by the end of our time together, you're going to have a crystal clear understanding of the fundamentals of ethical hacking and penetration testing.
I absolutely love this quote from our source material because it perfectly sets the stage for what we're talking about today. The digital world is essentially a giant ecosystem made up of these three groups. First up, you have the users. These are folks who just want to use software to do their jobs or browse the web. But, in their naivety, users often get compromised by hackers who use social engineering to steal personal data, or maybe crypto wallets. Then you've got the programmers. They are the unsung heroes building the software that keeps the modern world spinning. But guess what? They're vulnerable too. If a programmer accidentally leaves a backdoor open, it can lead to catastrophic consequences, costing billions. And then there are the hackers who exploit both of them. Today, we're going to learn to think exactly like that third group so we can better protect the first two.
To do this, we're going to track the actual kill chain of an attack. We'll start with the ethical hacker setup, move into reconnaissance and eavesdropping, hit exploitation and infiltration, tackle passwords and web vulnerabilities, look at forensics and chaos, and finally, wrap up with the biggest wildcard of all, the human element.
All right, Phase 1, the ethical hacker setup, or building the sandbox. So before we even touch these tools, we really need to establish the ground rules in the environment where all this stuff operates. To follow along safely in the real world, you absolutely wouldn't just download these onto your daily driver. You typically spin up an operating system called Kali Linux. It's incredibly optimized for ethical hacking and basically has all the tools we're going to discuss built right in from the get-go. A lot of professionals will spin up Kali Linux on a virtual private server. Doing that gives you the power and flexibility to run whatever you want with high-performance hardware, and you don't end up locked into a super complicated or expensive cloud platform. Once your server is up and running, you log in, and boom, your hacking sandbox is ready to go.
Now, huge red flag here, okay? Using the tools we're about to discuss non-consensually is a massive deal. It breaks international laws and it can literally land you in prison. So never perform penetration testing on a website or network without explicit permission. We are unpacking this strictly for defensive purposes, because to protect a system, you've got to know exactly how it gets attacked. Okay, moving on to Phase 2, reconnaissance and eavesdropping. This is all about mapping the target. Every single attack begins with reconnaissance. Hackers don't just guess. They do their homework to figure out exactly what devices are on a network and what data is floating around before they ever make a move. It's super interesting to contrast two foundational tools used for this, Nmap and Wireshark. Think of Nmap as the peeping Tom of the network. It actively probes doors and windows. It fires off packets across an IP range and analyzes the responses to tell you exactly which ports are open and what operating systems are running. It's perfect for finding misconfigured backdoors, like say an old unsecured printer sitting on a local network. On the flip side, we have Wireshark. If Nmap is jiggling the door handles, Wireshark is the party eavesdropper, just passively recording every whispered conversation happening inside. It collects a ton of data across hundreds of protocols in real time. If some weird traffic is quietly leaving your network, Wireshark lets you inspect the microscopic payload of those packets to see exactly what's being sent out. But hey, what if you're not even plugged into the network? That is exactly where Aircrack comes in. This tool is built specifically for hacking those magical, invisible packets floating around in the air that we all call Wi-Fi. Imagine you're just grabbing a latte at a local coffee shop. Someone sitting out in their car could be using commands like airmon and aerodump to pinpoint the coffee shop's network and then hitting it with Aircrack to break the Wi-Fi key. And once they're in, they can just pull your unencrypted packets completely out of thin air. This is literally the best argument for why we must always use HTTPS when browsing the web. If you submit a form with personal data over a plain HTTP connection, a tool like this intercepts the whole thing in plain text.
Which brings us to Phase 3, exploitation and infiltration, breaking in.
Once the network is mapped out and the vulnerabilities are lined up, it's time for the exploitation phase. That's where the actual penetration happens. And honestly, a Swiss Army knife with an AK-47 attached to it, that is quite literally the best way to describe our next tool, Metasploit. It is a terrifyingly powerful hacking framework. It's so comprehensive that it allows even totally unskilled users, often called script kiddies, to launch devastatingly sophisticated attacks without actually understanding the code underneath it all.
So how does that actually play out in real life? Well, say you've got an old computer on the network running Windows 7. An attacker can compromise it in just 3 really quick steps. First, They search the Metasploit console for a known vulnerability, something like the infamous Eternal Blue exploit. Second, they set up a payload, which is basically a set of instructions for the target computer telling it to execute a reverse shell that secretly calls back to the hacker's own IP address. Third, they just type the exploit command and hit enter. Boom, they are in. They can poke through files, mess with the desktop background, or just quietly install more malware.
All right, Phase 4, Passwords and Web Vulnerabilities, the classic database heist.
Once an attacker is actually inside the system, what are they even looking for? Well, the golden goose is the database, and specifically, cracking the passwords. Now, forget the Hollywood trope of a hacker typing furiously to guess a password. That's mostly a myth. In the real world, hackers steal the entire database. But nobody in their right mind stores passwords in plain text. Instead, they get hashed with a one-way algorithm, like bscript, and then salted with some random text to make them incredibly tough to reverse engineer. But notice I said tough, not impossible.
14 million. That is an absolutely massive number, and it represents the amount of highly common passwords sitting in an infamous, widely distributed file called rocku.txt. Hackers use a tool called Hashcat to run dictionary attacks utilizing this exact file. If a database was built using an older, weaker hashing algorithm like MD5, Hashcat can brute force those 14 million possibilities in literally seconds, taking that secure-looking hash and spitting out the plaintext password.
But wait, how exactly do they grab that database in the first place? It's basically a three-step automated dance. First, they deploy a tool called skipfish to recursively crawl a target website, hunting for web application screw-ups, stuff like cross-site scripting or SQL injection vulnerabilities. Then, they fire up SQL map to aggressively scan those weak points, automatically mapping out all the hidden database schemas, tables, and columns. Finally, they launch a SQL injection attack. They literally just type raw database code straight into standard website forms, like a login box or a search bar. This tricks the server into bypassing security protocols and dumping the contents of the database directly back to them.
Next up, Phase 5, Forensics and Chaos. We're talking destruction and recovery.
See, hackers don't just skim the visible stuff. They can dig up secrets you swore were gone forever, or they can cause massive, expensive chaos by attacking a server's availability. To actually be a successful cybersecurity pro, you kind of have to think like law enforcement. And law enforcement relies on tools like Foremost. This is a brilliant forensic data recovery tool. Imagine someone confiscating a highly classified hard drive, but all the data has been quote-unquote deleted and quick formatted. Foremost doesn't even need a working file system to read that drive. It scans the disk image byte by byte using a process called file carving. It hunts for the unique digital signature at the start of a file, like a JPEG image, and the signature at the end, and flawlessly reconstructs the image that was supposedly deleted forever. Now, on the total opposite end of the spectrum from quiet data recovery is just pure loud chaos. If an attacker just wants to take a website completely offline, they might use a tool called hping3. By toggling its flood option, hping3 hurls a massive wave of packets at an IP address without ever waiting for replies. Now, if this is just coming from one computer, that's a DOS, or denial of service attack, which can grind a server to a halt and rack up massive cloud hosting bills. But if the attacker distributes that same command across a botnet, which is thousands of previously hacked computers all firing at once, it becomes a devastating DDoS, or distributed denial of service attack. And finally, Phase 6, the human element, the ultimate vulnerability. We've talked networks, we've talked complex databases, we've talked server configs. But honestly, the sad, undeniable reality in cybersecurity is that the absolute weakest link in any organization is almost always us, the user. And that is exactly where the Social Engineering Toolkit, or SET, comes into play. This tool completely bypasses multi-million-dollar firewalls by just exploiting human trust. The source material highlights this painful scenario where someone trusts a fake prince with their checking account info, only to get completely robbed. Well, SET automates that exact kind of deception. It spins up highly sophisticated phishing campaigns via email, SMS texts, and even malicious QR codes. And the craziest part? Without writing a single line of code, an attacker can use SET to flawlessly clone a legitimate website, like PayPal. So when an unsuspecting victim types their email and password into that clone, the data goes straight to the hacker instead. Which leaves us with a really critical question. You can patch a server, and you can absolutely encrypt a database. But how on earth do you patch human trust? As we wrap up this explainer on these wildly powerful open source tools, I really want you to chew on that. Understanding tools like Nmap, Metasploit, and Hashcat is absolutely non-negotiable for building strong technical defenses. But at the end of the day, continuous learning, strict protocols, and a really healthy dose of digital skepticism, that's our best defense against the ultimate vulnerability. Thanks for hanging out with me on this deep dive, and hey, stay safe out there.